Hi everybody. In this video we're going to go over the two primary controversies that have plagued this year's US presidential election. The first controversy is the mail-in ballot controversy. This is about the belief that mail-in balloting is subject to massive fraud, much more so than in-person voting. We'll talk about that. And then the second controversy is this conspiracy theory that involves the in-person voting in which the voting machines are nefariously switching your vote or deleting your vote altogether for US President Donald Trump. And we'll cover that in the second half of this video. For now, let's get started with the mail-in voting controversy. This controversy involves the claim that mail-in balloting is subject to massive amounts of fraud. This despite the fact that there really is no evidence or proof or any kind of documentation to support this claim. I think it's entirely based on fear and suspicion. Now, it's my belief, and this is just my belief, that the Trump campaign purposely used and fed off of this fear in order to artificially segregate two voting blocks. Okay, and those two voting blocks are the in-person voters and the mail-in voters. Now, why would they do that? It's my belief that they did that because they figured that would be a good way to segregate the Trump voters, or most likely Trump voters, who would be voting in person from the Biden voters who would more than likely be voting by mail-in ballot. Now, this is by no means most people who would be voting in by ballot, but I think the final tally was something like 40 million. Ballots were mailed in, which is a huge number of mail-in ballots. Now, we think we had the final total was 80 million for Biden and 74 or 75 million for Trump, the overall voting tally. So 40 million mail-in ballots is still a huge amount of ballots. But getting back to this controversy, I believe that the Trump campaign purposely made a controversy out of the mail-in ballot situation so that they could use that as a method of separating or segregating the mail-in ballots from the in-person ballots and possibly creating a situation where, say, in-person ballots are legal and good and mail-in ballots are illegal and wrong. And I think events have kind of held true to that. So here is what I think their plan was. I think what their plan involved was first putting it out there, putting it out that mail-in voting was highly fraudulent and very, very, very suspect. And that sows doubt, fear, anxiety, and anger amongst the voting bloc most likely to vote for Trump, because that's the idea, is you want the people who vote for Trump to show up at the polls, and you want the people who are voting for Biden to do the mail-in ballot. Now, it didn't quite work out that way entirely. Still, millions of people voted in person for Biden and Democrats, and there were quite a few Republicans who voted for Trump and Republicans via mail-in ballot. But overall, the vast majority of the people who voted by mail voted for Democrats or Biden, which was, I believe, a part of the Trump campaign plan. Their intention would be to sow doubt and, at least figuratively speaking, invalidate the mail-in ballots. So that was part one of their plan, was just getting that out there, that mail-in balloting was fraudulent and subject to high amounts of fraud. Part two of their plan came in about the end of September. This was when various state legislatures started enacting legislation which prohibited the counting of mail-in ballots until Election Day. Okay, up until then, we didn't really hear a lot about how they would go about counting these ballots. But when the time came for these ballots to be mailed out, I think it was around the end of September, maybe the beginning of October, people began talking about, hey, when should we actually be counting these? We shouldn't actually be counting the ballots until Election Day, because that's the official start of the election, which I actually agreed with. I thought it was true. And because I was a little concerned that people would, loose lips sink ships. Loose lips would be putting out there, oh, you know, Biden is ahead by this or Trump is ahead by this in the mail-in ballots. So in order to prevent that situation from occurring, you can't start counting until election day. So a lot of states, if not most states, enacted legislation so that the vote counting could not start until election day. So that was part two of the Trump campaign's overall strategy. And when I say Trump campaign, I mean not just their campaign, but all of their supporters and like-minded people as well. Perhaps a conspiracy, if you will. So that was part two. Part three came on election day itself, at the very end of election day. And this part, I never even saw coming. Okay, this one surprised even me. I never anticipated part three, and it was I think it came as a surprise to a lot of people who are familiar with elections and election day, what happens and how ballots are counted, etc. What happened at the end of election day was part three of the plan. Right at midnight, the Trump campaign and all their supporters began to declare, very emotionally in some cases, including the president himself, that the ballot counting had to stop. This is actually unheard of in U.S. presidential politics. Okay, the idea that all ballot counting needs to stop at midnight on election day, that is ridiculous. Okay, I have no memory of that ever having occurred in my lifetime, and I think that would be true in U.S. history, especially if you consider the 1880s and early 20th century, where how the hell are they going to be able to count ballots, collect ballots to begin with? How are they going to count them all in one day, one 24-hour day? And it's not even 24 hours because the polls don't open till 7. They close at 7 p.m., 8 p.m., something like that. So what do they got, like 16 hours or so at most, something like that, to count millions of ballots? No. That's never been the case. And that they would declare that to be the case is ridiculous. So when midnight came around on election day 2020 and Wednesday, Tuesday tipped into Wednesday, all the Republican team all the Trump team and all of their Republican supporters began screaming and shouting about, you got to stop the counting needs to stop. Those are illegal votes right there, which was totally false, absolutely false. And I think even the Trump campaign was aware of that. In fact, I'm sure they were aware of that because nobody is that stupid. All right, nobody involved in politics, nobody involved in electioneering is that stupid to think that vote counting must stop at midnight on election day. That is ridiculous. So that was part three of their plan regardless. And why was that a part of the plan? Because it sows doubt, fear, and anger in the Trump support base. And that's all that matters. The plan all along from April and May all the way to election day was to put it in the heads of Trump supporters that the election day was fixed, that there was fraud going on. And this plan of theirs with the mail-in balloting and the idea that there's massive fraud going on, this plan works regardless of whether Trump wins or not. Okay, so we all know that Trump lost the election on election day. Well, most of us know. Others are still in denial. So Trump lost on election day. And now he's using this, that the election was fraudulent and the election was rigged as a big sort of crusade. Now, this crusade would still have worked if he had won the election, because he could still say to all of his fawning admirers that, hey, you know what? I won the election despite the Democrats' use of fraud and despite everybody trying to rig the election. I won anyway. I am the man. So I think that would have worked anyway, perfectly fine. So either way, win or lose, giving the masses a villain, a huge villain, and that this grand conspiracy existed to rig the election and commit massive amounts of fraud, somewhere on the order of hundreds of thousands of votes, if not millions of votes being deleted, switched, etc., and so on. I think that was very useful to the Trump campaign and the Trump following in general, regardless of whether Trump won or lost the election. So now that we're done with that mail-in ballot controversy, let's move over now to the in-person controversy, which involves the voting machine, so-called conspiracy to prevent Trump from winning re-election. Okay, so we're going to start off with me giving you some general observations as to why I don't believe that the U.S. presidential election was rigged. Okay, so we'll start off with number one. If the nationwide elections were rigged, then why did state and U.S. congressional Republicans fare so well overall? Okay, now in the House of Representatives, the Republicans gained seats. Okay, they didn't give them a majority, but they still won some seats. Additionally, incumbent representatives won their re-elections. Okay, going to the Senate, all right, that's a bit of a battle right now, but there was not the wholesale loss of seats that many had predicted that the Republicans would suffer. Okay, nearly all the Republicans retained their seats except for a couple, and there was a couple of contested seats in Georgia that is upcoming. It has not taken place prior to this video. Okay, so that's kind of notable right there. Okay, secondly, rigged elections are nearly always extremely lopsided in favor of the person doing the rigging, okay, or the party doing the rigging. So we didn't see this really in this election. We saw a lot of close calls in these various states here, these battleground states. They were very close. Now, if you're going to rig an election, similar to the way Belarus did theirs with Lukashenko, you're going to make it really safe. You're gonna make your guy win by a long shot. Okay, it's not going to be close, because if an election is close, well, then you got to deal with controversy and recounts, and everybody's examining the ballots. You don't want to do that. So just make it easy and make it every state's electoral college votes or popular votes rather, make them as convincing as possible. Okay. So if you're going to rig something, do it safely and make it by a long shot. Make it huge, a big convincing victory, so that nobody's going to do or ask for a recount or anything like that. Also, it's also notable that this election is unique in that usually the person or parties who rig an election are the people in power. Okay, the president or the political party in power. They're the ones who rig the election because they want to stay in power. It's not usually the challenger or the opponents or the people not in power. It's usually not them who rig the election. So that's kind of weird right there. Okay, and then finally, the closeness of these various races demonstrates to me that they were in fact fair. Why? Because of the above reason that I stated. If you're going to rig an election, you want to win by a wide margin so that there are no questions. And to me, the fact that these were so close and these battleground states were so hard fought to the end tells me that they were actually, in fact, fair. Okay, so that's my general observations about these. All right, now let's talk about the Dominion voting systems conspiracy theory. Okay, and I want to say right off right now, I don't believe the Dominion voting systems did anything nefarious. I don't believe they deleted votes. I don't believe they switched votes. I don't believe any of that happened. And the reason I don't believe any of that happened is because there's no evidence that any of that happened. Okay, we have a lot of accusations. Okay, I'll give you that. There are a lot of accusations. But I haven't seen an ounce of any evidence to support the theory that Dominion voting systems committed some kind of massive election fraud. Okay, and I don't believe we are ever going to see that. Now, this Dominion conspiracy theory began with on the first day or second day, people started talking about who owned Dominion, and the ownership situation with Dominion seemed to change by the hour or by the day at least, as each phony theory became exposed. So it started out with, oh, it's a Venezuelan-owned company. Venezuelan immigrants own it, and they're feeding all this information to the Venezuelans, Hugo Chavez and created this, and now all this information is going to Venezuela, and they're changing the votes or deleting Trump votes. I can't think of a reason why Venezuela would want to do that to begin with. Does it really matter whether it's a Democrat or a Republican who's in power in the White House? We're both against them. So I don't think President Obama was in favor of the Venezuelan authoritarian leadership, and I don't think Biden becoming president in 2021 makes a difference as far as what's going on down there. But it doesn't matter whether you believe that or not, because Dominion is not owned by Venezuelan immigrants. That company is in fact Smartmatic, right? 2 immigrants who came over from Venezuela, I believe in the early 2000s, and the company is headquartered, Smartmatic, in Florida. Okay, also, Dominion and Smartmatic are not the same. Okay, this was an extension of that. After it was discovered that Dominion, in fact, was a Canadian company originally, the story changed to, oh yeah, well, Dominion and Smartmatic are one and the same. And the story would change about whether Dominion owned Smartmatic or Smartmatic owned Dominion. Well, they don't, neither owns the other, okay, and they're not associated in any way either, okay? They have no business relationship, they're basically competitors, okay? They have competitive software, okay? Now, Dominion does own 2 subsidiaries, okay? They do own Premier Election Solutions and Sequoia Voting Systems, as of this video. Now, I found out this information, by the way, by just doing a Google search. Okay, and that's all people have to do. When you hear these conspiracy theories about, a company being owned by Venezuelans and Dominion and Smartmatic being one and the same, or, any other kind of nonsense that you come across, just check the data, check the information. Don't just take it at face value because you trust the politicians who told you that. And finally, getting down to the last one, Dominion is also not owned by either the Democratic Party or the Clinton Foundation. Okay, that's the 2 of the other conspiratorial conclusions that were made. Oh, they're owned by the Clinton Foundation, and that's all just a bunch of bullshit. All right, they're not owned by the Democrats. They're not owned by Hugo Chavez's estate. They're not owned by any nefarious kind of group that's trying to overthrow Donald Trump. All right, they are in fact co-owned by its current management team and the Staple Street Capital, and they have their headquarters located in Toronto, Canada, and Denver, Colorado. And again, I just looked it up in Google. It was as simple as that, and that's all you need to do too. Dominion machines are not used in many of the districts and many states being contested. This is the case, and you could just look it up, and I'm going to show you a map real quick that will show you exactly where Dominion machines were being, or software were being used in the 2020 election. So let's switch over to that. So here we have a map, and I am at a website called verifiedvoting.org, and this map here shows us exactly where Dominion voting systems hardware and software was being used. Now, if you've been following this whole controversy, you may have heard that Dominion voting systems, machines and software is used in 23 states for the 2020 presidential election. And you can see from this map that it does indeed appear that they have used them in 23 states. But you can also see from this map that the degree to which Dominion voting system software hardware is being used varies by whatever state they happen to be in. Some states, such as Alaska, Louisiana, Georgia, New York, Massachusetts, they appear to almost exclusively use Dominion voting system software in every county. I didn't mean to imply that they're in every town and every city, but they appear to be used in every county, pretty much every county throughout those respective states. But you can also see from this map that there are some states where Dominion voting system software is being used, but only in a smattering of counties. Or in Washington State's case, it appears to be just one county. All right, so the level to which the Dominion voting system software is being used varies from state to state depending on which state you're in. So yes, it's true that Dominion software and hardware is being used in 23 states, but it's also true that in some states it's hardly being used. It's in very few counties. Okay, so that does vary. Okay. Also, I want to address right now as well that some people were arguing that it was very suspicious that Trump had lost in states where Dominion voting system software was being used, and he had won states where it was not being used. And that's true that in some states where Dominion software was being used, Trump did lose. Okay, we can look at Nevada, we can look at Georgia, we can look at New York, California. Okay, we can see quite easily that Dominion software was being used in those states, and Trump did in fact lose in those states. However, it's also true that if you look at this map again, look at Alaska, look at Louisiana, right? Trump won those states. And those states almost exclusively, it appears from this map, use Dominion voting systems, software, and hardware. Okay, so there are exceptions to this, okay? And as you can see from this map as well, there are states in the middle of the country that Trump won where Dominion software was being used. But you can't make an assertion, a blanket assertion, that, oh, Dominion software was being used in this state, therefore that's why Trump lost in the state. Okay, that's not honest. That's not you're not telling the whole story. And we can tell from this map that it would be very difficult in some of these states for Dominion software to actually influence the election in any decisive way because of the infrequency of the counties in which it was being used. What do you need? What do you need? My dog. My doggy wants some attention. Now let's go over to another map that's going to show us the Electoral College results from the election as they stand right now. Now, this map is interactive. We are now at www.270towin.com. Okay, and that's because it takes 270 Electoral College votes to win. And as you can see, we have Biden over here on the left with 306, and we have Trump with 232. That's been widely reported. But because this map is interactive, we're going to play around with some numbers here. And I wanted to show you this because, to me, this result here is not the easiest way that Biden could have won the election. In fact, this looks kind of cumbersome. If you're going to rig an election, right, if you're going to commit to fraudulent votes and you're going to rig a nationwide election so that you can become president of the United States, there is an easier way to go about that than the way this is laid out right here, right now. Okay, you can see that Biden really needed to win Wisconsin, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, Georgia. He needed Arizona, he needed Nevada. All of these pieces to his puzzle needed to fall into place in order for him to win this election. Okay, now if it's being rigged, in my opinion, there's a much easier way to get to that 270 without having to win all those states in there. So let's go ahead and do this, okay? I'm going to change some win-loss columns here, okay? Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that Biden won Florida. Okay, now I know that he lost Florida by a pretty good chunk of votes. I think it was like 350 or 360,000 votes. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that we had a conspiracy, and there was massive voter fraud, and that the electoral college machines, excuse me, the voting machines were fixed, and that the mail-in ballots were fraudulent. And it was all conspired in such a way that Biden was able to win Florida. Okay, so we never knew about the 360,000 votes that Trump won by, because they were either switched, deleted, or the mail-in ballots were just, taken care of, added in, a little pad in Biden's votes there in Florida. So now he won Florida. Well, guess what he doesn't need? He has 335 electoral college. Well, he doesn't need Pennsylvania anymore. Let's give Pennsylvania to Trump, okay? Well, Biden still wins by a wide margin here. He's got 315 to 223 for Trump. So let's see. I'm going to guess that, let's see. Oh, we don't need Georgia anymore. So let's give Georgia to Trump. Well, that doesn't work. Let's see. Biden still wins by 299 to 239 for Trump. So let's say, oh, Trump really thought that he was going to win Arizona. So let's give him Arizona. Go. Okay, so now Trump has won Arizona. Oh, but guess what? Biden still wins. 288 to 250 for Trump. Something's amiss here. Let's see. What else can Trump get? Let's give him Michigan. So he gets Michigan. But guess what happens? Biden still wins by 272 electoral votes to Trump's 266 votes. So isn't this, looking at this scenario, much easier for Biden to do? If you're going to rig an election, isn't this easier? All you got to do is win Florida. Then the only other state you got to win that's in question here is, well, maybe Nevada. And that's it. And then you're done. You've won the election. You got your 272. Trump got his 266. He's out. You're in. And there we go. But instead, it looks like Biden did the roundabout way. He had to get all these other little states. And he didn't get them by a wide enough margin to prevent recounts in several of these states. So it was kind of sloppy. So if this was a rigged election, it was done in a rather sloppy way, and it was a much easier way to do it. I personally, if I was in charge of the rigging, I would have said, hey, let's just take Florida and the hell with all those other states. That's the easiest way to do it. So now we've pretty much covered all the topics I wanted to cover in this video here. Dominion machines weren't used in all the states. We know it was 23 states, and even in those 23 states, they were not used in every county except for a few states. Dominion machines were used in many of the districts and states that Trump in fact won. Okay, we covered a couple of those states, Alaska and Louisiana. And then finally, Dominion machines would need to have had a practical monopoly in the vote counting, and would need to have been used in most of the voting districts in nearly every state in order to actually affect the overall election. And again, from the map that we saw, they clearly did not have any such monopoly. Now, conspiracy theorists can say that it wasn't just Dominion, that Smartmatic was also involved in it, and I don't have a map for Smartmatic, or any number of other voting machine companies. They could have all been in this cabal and conspired together and done that. That's true. It all depends on how far you want to carry the conspiracy, and how gullible you want to be, and what are you prepared to believe. Okay, as a person, how far are you prepared to go in a conspiracy theory? All right, to keep this thing going. The last point I want to make is there is absolutely, to this day, zero evidence whatsoever of any vote rigging, any deleted votes, any votes being switched from Trump to Biden. We have zero evidence of this whatsoever. We've been promised again and again and again by Trump's attorneys that they are providing evidence, or will provide evidence, of massive fraud. Not a little bit of fraud, but massive fraud. And we have gotten not one shred of evidence of anything on the massive scale. Okay, so that is a huge problem in this conspiracy theory. If you're going to bring evidence, you better start presenting it. That'll be it for this video. Thanks for watching if you made it this far, and I'll see you in the next video.